Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. I'd like to thank Representative Regenberg for introducing this bill and to apologize for my share of coughing over in the corner tonight. I'd start by addressing a couple of the concerns that have been brought up by the committee. As far as the emoluments clause, which you know is hard to pronounce, I think that's specifically referring to Trump's business interests, such as the Mar-a-Lago Club, which directly after the election doubled their price of membership, which is substantial. It's in the order of tens of thousands of dollars. They doubled the price of their membership, which allows foreign officials to basically make direct payments to Donald Trump and his family, which severely compromises the integrity of that office. As to the mention of military officers in there, I would argue that it's particularly towards military officers that the Nuremberg principles were written as a protection of their innate moral autonomy as military officers, particularly the fourth Nuremberg principle, which states that following the orders of the superior is not an excuse for violating fundamental human rights and international law. And I think that while it is a good idea to also include the governor in this, it's particularly to the people who are in the position of getting their hands dirty or carrying out someone else's orders, that we remind them that they're not just pieces of a machine, but they have their own moral agency. And I think, furthermore, that this is not a resolution that addresses normal times and normal circumstances. This is specifically plowing the ground before an unusual circumstance happens, such as 1957 in Little Rock, Arkansas, when President Eisenhower sent in the 101st Airborne in opposition to the state National Guard. So it's not always going to be National Guard. It could be anyone who gets sent in an unusual circumstance. And we can't definitively predict what all of those might be, which is why it's important to make this statement now, before we're in that situation, reminding people of the agency that they have. And of all of the declarations within this resolution, I think fundamentally it's asserting and declaring two fundamental points. First is that all of us have moral agency and moral responsibility for what goes on in our country, from the generals to the jurors that are serving in any jury. All of us have our own moral agency, and the law never requires us to silence that and to commit atrocities against our fellow citizens and our fellow human beings. And the second thing that it asserts is that all of you, legislators, state legislators, are not just moral agents, but are public moral leaders, and that you have the right to make this kind of statement in public, which is not binding. It doesn't require anyone to do anything, but it's making a moral statement in the public before we get into an atrocious situation, but one that is not at this point unreasonable to suspect could occur. When we look back at the history of the Nuremberg principles, part of the defense that a lot of people who carried out those tyrannical orders made was that they had no idea how bad things would get. That they couldn't have imagined what actually happened and what actually was carried out. And now at our place in history, we no longer have that excuse. We can look back in history. We know how bad things could get when we scapegoat a certain class of people or a certain religion of people. And we're seeing that happen now. We don't have the excuse of ignorance anymore. We don't have that luxury. And because we don't have that, it means that we now have the moral responsibility to speak up and to act before things get that bad. And that's fundamentally what this legislation does. We know where things are headed. One of the pieces of this legislation says that we urge government officials to not lie to the public or withhold scientific information. Just this past week, the Office of Energy and Climate Change within the Department of Energy was told they're not allowed to use the words climate change anymore. They're not allowed to use the words sea level rise. They're not allowed to use the words carbon emission. They're being told to withhold and lie to the public, lie to all of you, about an issue of existential importance to the state of Rhode Island. Think about that. The government is telling its experts on sea level rise to not talk to any of us about sea level rise. That's an existential issue to Rhode Island. This is something of critical importance that is happening right now. We know what the agenda is. We know who the scapegoats are. We know who is being targeted. We know what the agenda is of Russian interference in our government, because we can look at what their economy is based on. They're almost entirely based on fossil fuel development and exports. That is the vast majority of their economy. So we can see that agenda. We can see it connected to the restrictions that are already coming down through the EPA and our federal government to rein in the protections that we have for our climate. And that's not disconnected from the other pieces of this legislation, because the fossil fuel agenda has always gone hand in hand with the repression of citizens. It has always involved violence, because those who are threatened by climate change, young people who see their futures being foreclosed more and more every day, are standing up and resisting more and more every day. I know, Chairman Cable, you've seen that in your own district in Burrillville, with how committed people have been of standing up against that fossil fuel infrastructure that is being tried to force down the throats of their community. And the same thing is happening across the country of people resisting. And this is a personal issue for me, not only because I've spent a lot of time as a climate activist and have been involved in that, but a friend of mine, Sophia Wilanski, last fall was out at Standing Rock, and she was in a line of nonviolent protesters when she was hit directly on the arm with a concussion grenade, fired by either the police or the National Guard. It's unknown. She was hit on the arm, and it blew off basically all of her ulna, part of her radius, all of the soft tissue between her elbow and her wrist. She was 22 years old. She just graduated from Williams College last spring. And now she's never going to have the use of her arm again. And we know that young people are not just going to give up as they see their future being foreclosed. They're going to continue standing up. And so the question is, are we going to allow a continued increase of repression against those people who just want the same kind of livable future that the generations before them have experienced? And as we head down towards that road of increased insecurity from climate disruption, where we see options being foreclosed to us and people are feeling insecure, we know that the leaders in power are going to scapegoat certain classes of people. They're going to say, oh, you feel insecure? Maybe that's because of these immigrants. Maybe that's because of the Muslim people that are threatening you. All of this is interconnected, and we're facing very real threats. This is not arbitrary. This is an existential threat to this state, to our nation, to our entire civilization. And we all of us, have a moral responsibility of preventing it from happening, and you, as leaders, have a moral responsibility of speaking out and making this powerful statement. And I hope that you do not shirk that responsibility and that you move this legislation forward. Thank you. I'm open to any questions.
Thank you, Ken. Any questions for Mr. DeChristopher? Thank you very much, Ken.